So welcome everybody to, I think the fourth talk on compassion. Become kind of a series on its own. We'll talk at the end about sort of where we might go from here in terms of talks, a series. But I really wanted to kind of share the way that I practice with compassion, and that meditation that we just did is really the guided meditation. The way that when I sort of silently within guide myself in a compassion meditation is how I would guide myself by sensing into the compassionate awareness that's already there, rather than trying to create a feeling of compassion, trying to conjure it up or manufacture it in some way, kind of come at it a different way. I mean, I like the word evoke. I don't know if you notice the word, I use the word evoke a lot because it's cultivate is something that, I mean, I guess you have the seed is planted when you cultivate, is how we usually think of that word. So there's that sense of growing a seed. But I kind of look at compassion as not just its seed, it is our true nature. And maybe we overlook it. So there's ways to kind of evoke it or touch it that's already there. It's already a full-grown tree or plant. It's already grown. It's our true nature. It's already present within ourselves. We don't need to cultivate or manufacture it in that sense. It's the innate dimension of our authentic being, who we actually are. So it's not something we need to do. It's not something we need to manufacture or conjure up. Although there are insight practices that we can engage in that can evoke it, right? So that, as I said, we could be overlooking it, that innate essence. So when we engage in these practices, of course, it brings it to the surface, or it kind of evokes it. And I was practicing this all week, and I could notice that, I was evoking compassion. It was spilling, that aspect of my innate being was spilling forth during the week. So I was noticing acts of compassion around me. Little simple things would almost, would just bring this joy. I'll give you an example. It was a woman walking down. Our whole road's torn up with construction. They're putting in new sewer lines and water mains and sidewalks. Everything's gone, right? It's just a big pile of, and there was this fairly elderly woman walking down what's left of the sidewalk and with a cane, and she's, slowly making her way down. And where the construction's the worst, it's all just rubble. And I saw her, and I was going to go over and see if she needed any help. And I noticed this big burly construction worker, with the hard hat, and comes bounding over and puts out his arm, and she just takes his arm, and he was at least a third to a half higher than she was, and she just takes his arm and he guides her through all this rubble. And so I just seeing that, I could just feel it, the warmth and softness in my heart. One day after I did a lengthy compassion practice, we went for a walk with the dog and with Rocky, and I just wanted to say hi to everybody and connect with everybody. And so I did this, the first person, I go, hi, good morning. And they didn't say anything. I guess they had something else on their mind. The second, there's a person, oh, hi, hello. Didn't say anything. And then this couple goes by who we actually see sometimes walking. They walk by and I say hello, and they didn't say anything. So I kind of laughed. I said, why? Am I invisible? Like, she goes, oh, people just have other things on their mind, right? But even in that, I felt a compassion for the fact that they were not trying to, it wasn't about me, right? They just had other things lately going on, right? So I could feel compassion for whatever might be going on in their lives. So I guess what I'm saying is, we can evoke that sense of compassion. And I did notice shifts in the way that that there was a felt warmth and softness and a connection with other beings just by doing that practice. But that doesn't mean I was, manufacturing compassion. I was simply touching into what's already there, which, as I said, can go overlooked, can kind of get buried in the noise of the ego doing its, struggling with what is. We can ignore. So compassion is not something egos do. Right? So if we get the idea that we need to cultivate or fabricate compassion, we get kind of trapped in this idea that this is something that egos do. So we can be trying to create a compassionate ego. And so judge, am I compassionate enough? Maybe I'm not compassionate enough. I should do more compassion training because I'm definitely not compassionate enough. Well, that's just the ego judging and comparing, right? Egos, it's true compassion is not something egos do. Egos being compassionate isn't a bad thing, and I'm not dissing it in any way. If I had a choice, I'd rather hang out with compassionate egos than, or egos trying to be compassionate, as opposed to, egos that aren't trying to be compassionate, just more pleasant. Could say they're more pleasant dream characters to be around. So I'm not really saying that there's anything wrong with egos being compassionate. So this is big, right? An ego trying to be compassionate is not true compassion. This is why I was using this. I was trying to, think of a phrase. True, it's true because it's our true nature. Ego's trying to be compassionate. Not a bad thing, but it's not true compassion, that inner essence, dimension of our being. So I think a lot of mindfulness practitioners come into compassion practice thinking that it will make them more compassionate. So there can be an ego striving, wanting to become more compassionate. Remember, you're already fully compassionate. Your true nature, your inner essence is already fully compassionate, truly compassionate. And compassion is not something I feel for another. This is another important part. An ego, it's not an ego-centered compassion that's kind of tainted by a self-centered view or self-concern, right? With right view, and I think this is maybe where I'll go in next week, we know deeply that ultimately the notion of self and other is a misperception. And when we know deeply that this whole notion of self and other, this separate self, and we know deeply that this is a misperception or an illusion, then this true compassion is not something I feel for another. It's what I feel it's myself and yourself. True compassion is, I deeply know that you are me and I am you, and we're not separate. So, yeah. And ego-centered compassion, you could say, is not arising from a heart that's let go of self-centered grasping. Self-centered grasping is still present. We can actually grasp at the whole idea of being more compassionate, having a more compassionate ego, because when we create that separation. So true compassion comes from the place of knowing interbeing or interconnectedness, that we are all dependently co-arising. Thich Nhat Hanh calls the insight of interbeing, everything relies on everything else in order to manifest. Everything relies on everything else in order to manifest. And we saw this when we looked at dependent origination, dependent co-arising, how the interdependence of everything is so it's what causes manifestation, right? So we can't disconnect. We can't be separate. There would be nothing if we were separate. We're arising based on our connectedness. So with dependent origination, there's actually only one here, one interconnected whole. So when we talk about wholeness, we're talking about that interconnected whole. So when you meet someone, you could say you're really meeting yourself. Sometimes you meet yourself as an angry person. Sometimes you meet yourself as a compassionate person. I don't know. I think of any. You might meet yourself in all kinds of different states. So when we see beyond the kind of veil of separation, the delusion of separation, we don't create otherness. It's simply life meeting life, spirit meeting spirit, divine meeting divine. It's not me meeting you. It's not me meeting itself. It's spirit meeting spirit in that sense. And that perception is true compassion. So it's a natural, true compassion. And some may think that this means that we don't stand up for justice or stop harmful or destructive behavior, and it's quite the opposite. And this is what I'm calling heart-based wisdom. That we also bring heart-based wisdom into the picture to know when to respond and intervene from the place of non-separation or wholeness. I talked about this when we talked about race and racialization. And how to respond. So to see, am I responding from a place of wholeness? So yeah, so basically I won't say too much about that. That true compassion doesn't mean that we are doormats, or we just take whatever everyone or anyone does. Right? Look at a skillful mother. One that remains connected, that don't become angry or upset with their son or daughter. They do that. You see this all the time. They remain connected, but they intervene with certain behaviors. So if they see, Johnny using the soup cans as Lego in the middle of the grocery store, skillful mother still intervenes. The mother approaches the child and tells them that they need to stop doing this, right? So there's still an but there's the connection can still remain open. You can tell it, the mother can tell the child not to do something without severing the connection, or that connection of love. I always think that the Buddha liked to use the example of a mother and a child to kind of display true connection and loving kindness and compassion. So this may all sound kind of mysterious, I don't know, complicated, I don't know, but it's not. It's always there. So it's not always about saying yes. It's not about accepting bad behavior. It's about heart wisdom. So discerning, I guess, it would be the word, the appropriate response while keeping the connection of love, right? Keeping that connection of love and compassion. Because compassion is action, right? The word karuna is connected to the word karma, which is action. So there's a responsiveness. So it requires the trembling heart, the sensitivity to the suffering, but it also then requires the responsiveness to relieve that suffering. That's the action part of compassion. So we discover this, our kind of true unity, when we are sensitive to the suffering of others and we respond to the others, the oneness with life with each other, our true non-separation. So we don't lose our human autonomy. Paradoxically, as we discover our true non-separateness, we actually also discover our human autonomy. We discover our unity without losing our autonomy. But the ego thinks of autonomy as separateness, right? But we can also think of it as understanding wholeness. So cultivating, I want to just finish up in the last little bit. So evoking, I'm even trained to use the word cultivating. Evoking, it's my new word. I'm replacing evoking wherever I come across compassion, but it's going to take some rewiring for that to happen automatically, create a new habit loop. So evoking through compassion. So as I said, it's not something we manufacture. It's something we sense into and know at our deepest level, right? We sense oneness, and it can start out as being very subtle, right? A deep feeling that we're not actually different, that there is a sameness, this interconnection. So when we are together and not forgetting this, our actions naturally reflect it. So when we forget it, so we don't have to try to be compassionate. It just happens. And so even if you don't have a deep realization of this, of oneness and non-separation, you can't feel into it. So I'm going to kind of maybe back up because it can seem mysterious, right? And so I've come up with what I'm calling a connection practice, for lack of a better, it's not a catchy name, but it's just a practice where we can sense into this connection. So when you approach somebody, so immediately, as soon as you approach somebody, feel into the energetic connection that exists. And you can really feel into this. I was playing around with it during the weekend. It's a very real energetic sense of connection that you can feel. So it's when you first approach them, before any words are uttered. It's very important that it's that moment of initial connection. So you sense into this subtle connection, and then pay attention. So once you've sensed this energetic connection, pay attention to the exact moment when that connection is severed. You will be able to observe the exact words, usually words that sever that connection. It's like a wire is cut. Can even be thoughts, your own thoughts, but that then don't become words, because you're thinking this may sever the connection, but even that thought can sever the connection. But usually we're looking for those exact words, phrase. So if you speak anything that's harsh, harmful, perhaps untrue, anything that establishes a wall of separation, you will feel that connection being severed. And like I say, it's almost like a wire being cut. It can be, if you do this as a practice all week, it can actually be quite unsettling. It's almost like an abrupt disconnection with another being, with somebody. So you sense into the energetic connection before anything is said, and you'll likely learn how you can be with anybody, even difficult people, as long as the connection is open. Anybody, people you don't, complete strangers. I was practicing with some of the construction workers this afternoon. I just approach them and have this energetic connection, and then notice a point where it got severed. Just by, innocuous kind of phrase of one being wanting to be right. So an ego wanting to be right entered the picture. You'd see the connection was severed, and then it kind of paused. And it could be reconnected. And it was a really beautiful connection. A neighbor his wife has like mouth and throat cancer, and the prognosis isn't good. So I was asking how she was, but he was so open to being connected, that the energetic connection was very powerful, right? Like he was looking deeply into me. It wasn't just me connecting with him. He was also deeply connecting with me, and the connection felt very, almost like a thicker wire, a thicker connection that it would take a lot more to sever, right? We stayed connected for some time, even as we went on and spoke about other topics. So there's a practice so if you're not, sometimes you do a teaching like this, people go, well, this oneness, unity, I'm not really feeling it. Like, I can hear it, I can understand it. And I've heard, Rinpoches say it, and Lamas say it, and Joseph Goldstein say it. And I've heard all these, but I don't really, I don't feel it so much. But this is just a very subtle practice to get you to sense into it. So I really invite you to engage with that, and it'll be helpful, if we move forward in the kind of the teachings I have in mind, to have that the connection practice kind of is something that you've engaged, and it's a beautiful practice. It's something, I always say I engage in the practice that I do for the week, but I think I'm just going to continue this one indefinitely. So something I need to just do for a week and then move on to another practice. This can be done anytime, anywhere, anytime you meet somebody. And of course, other ways to evoke compassion is simply turning towards suffering wherever it's encountered. Right? Because the ego often wants to resist, puts up a wall. So it's just having that intention to open towards suffering, to be present in the face of anger, fear, alienation. So you can have that intention to open to the arising of suffering. Yeah. I think I'll leave it there and open it up for any questions and comments.